We're going to look at the works today of Toulouse-Lautrec, an artist that I've never had the opportunity to teach in any breadth before. And then secondly, we'll look at a few works of naturalism, the style that that uh, that dominated the more mainstream practice of art in the late 19th century. In talking about Toulouse-Lautrec, we'll be returning to the subject matter of urban leisure that we encountered quite widely before in the works of the Impressionists, Degas especially, Manet secondly. But with Toulouse-Lautrec, we're dealing more with dance halls, with bawdy, rowdy, sexually suggestive kinds of subjects. He's an artist with a fascinating biography. He lived between 1864 and 1901. That is about 37 years. And he's one of the very few, I mean, you could count them on one hand, artists who came from an aristocratic background. He was the only surviving child, that is the only child that survived infancy, of a noble family in the south of France. And the nobility was on both sides of his family, both mother and father. Had Henri survived his father, he would have become the Count of Toulouse. But that was not to be. His parents separated when he was only 4, and at age 8, he went to live with his mother in Paris, where his skill and interest in art became evident early on. And while there for a few years, he received informal drawing lessons. From his childhood, his physical development was abnormal. There's a lot of speculation about why this was the case, perhaps the result of a long family history of inbreeding. And so at age 11, he returned with his mother to Albi in the south of France for consultations with doctors and for thermal baths. His mother looking for any sort of assistance or answer that might bring about more normal development. Subsequently, just a few years later, he fractured both legs, and neither fracture healed properly, leaving him stunted in height, about 4 feet 8 inches when fully grown. His upper body was normal in its development. His legs were not. And so he was unable to participate in the activities of his class, particularly outdoor hunting activities. As an alternative, he immersed himself in art. He moved back to Paris in 1882. He would have been only 18 years of age, and he did so to study with Léon Bonnat. Now, Bonnat was a prominent and successful painter of fashionable portraits. Toulouse-Lautrec's mother had high ambitions for him, and succeeded in arranging that instructive relationships. But before the year was over, Bonnat shut down his studio, and Toulouse-Lautrec had to move to the studio of Fernand Cormon. He found there a more relaxed atmosphere. He would remain there for 5 years' time and establish relationships with other artists who would go on to successful careers and have places of some note in the history of art, including Émile Bernard, Louis Anquetin, and Vincent van Gogh. I'm showing you on the screen here a work which is entitled The Marble Polisher. It dates from sometime between 1882 and 87, during a period of time when Toulouse-Lautrec was in the studio of Cormon. And it looks very much like a studio work. We're looking at the male figure. He is ostensibly engaged in polishing marble. You can see him bent forward with a tool. but this would be a studio pose. Of course, this would not be done by men in a state of nakedness, but it's rather just a convenient studio pose that that presents the body in a particular way and presents a challenge to these young artists. And you can see that in his depiction, Lautrec has it's concentrated on anatomical detail and quite competently modeled the body in color, primarily color, to some extent in light and dark, but largely color. You can see this across the back. And those shifts in color bring out the muscle masses, the bone structure, the anatomical structure of the body. So he would have been, roughly 20 years of age when this was painted. While there, well, I should say, from the following year, we know this work dates from 1885, and it's a portrait of Suzanne Valadon. It's said that Lautrec and Valadon had a relationship, a romantic relationship, and that she attempted suicide when that relationship ended. She went on to a career as a successful painter. She modeled for several artists. Manet is one. I think Degas perhaps another. And notice that she's shown here in this painting frontally in a manner that's largely drawn. We might label this, as many of Lautrec's works are, color drawings. And the technique is very light and sketch-like. And yet it's quite effective and artistically engaging. Here, another portrait drawing, and this is of Vincent van Gogh. So during that brief period of time when Van Gogh studied, only for him about 4 months, 6 months at most, in the studio of Cormon. Cormon then shut the studio down in 1887. And Van Gogh had arrived in Paris in 1886. Presumably, their friendship continued beyond the studio encounter. Toulouse-Lautrec went on to exhibit works in an exhibition that Van Gogh organized, and later defended him. I'll mention that in a few minutes. So we're looking at a profile drawing, which gives us some idea of what Van Gogh looked like. And we see him concentrating on a subject which he is representing the drawing there in front of him. In 1885, Lautrec began to exhibit his works at the cabaret that was run by Aristide Bruant called Mirliton. In 1887, as I said, he exhibited with Van Gogh in an exhibition that Van Gogh organized. In 1888, he exhibited with Levin, the 20, in Brussels. He was invited to do so. And then between 1889 and 94, he exhibited every year in the Salon of the Independents. In 1890, it's said that during a banquet of Levin, at which Lautrec attended, that he challenged to a duel another artist who had criticized the works of Van Gogh. Well, the artist later apologized, and the duel never happened. This is something about the spirited, fiery, opinionated personality of Lautrec. Some other early works. Here's a work entitled The Laundress. This dates from 1888. This is, of course, a subject that Degas had popularized. And of all the earlier artists, it is Degas that has the closest connections with Lautrec. The subject matter of urban work, which we see here, urban leisure, music, the spectacle of music, and the really supreme drawing skills of Degas. We will see in many works by Toulouse-Lautrec, a real virtuoso draftsman. From 1891 is this portrait of Gabrielle. one of a number of works which he made of her out in the woods. And here we really see Lautrec's mature style. Um, this is a work that is primarily drawn and then sort of colored in a sketchy way. But you'll notice that really all the drawn marks are evident. Nothing, there's no blending of brushstrokes. There's no hiding of earlier marks. Um, the his handling of outline is really well done and really expressive. And we can see this in the very clear and confident outline of her face, but also we'll see in the outline of clothing and limbs, clear indications of anatomical structure and the movement of the body. The medium used here to color this is oil, but the oil has been thinned down so extensively that it's about half transparent and allows the drawn marks of the process to show through. The coloring is rather pale. And then one other work that shows us these same things, is this called La Toilette, the toilet. So we see a young woman here who's engaged in cleaning and dressing. This dates too from 1889. Again, I think that Lautrec's his really refined and confident drawing skills are very much in evidence. And you'll notice that all the outlines of the figure around the face, the back, the legs are very convincingly foreshortened. They appear to project out into space. And this is very little accomplished with modeling, but mainly just in the contour line that traces the shape of the leg and its recession in space so convincingly. Again, the coloring is semi-transparent. The colors are pale. We're allowed to see right through them and you see the drawn marks which are built up over the process of making the work. Now, Lautrec is perhaps most famous for his dance hall scenes. Really, from the time he went to Paris, he resided in the neighborhood of Montmartre. This is to the north, another district of Paris, right on the periphery of the city, on a hill that overlooks the city. The church of Sacre-Cœur is located there and was under construction at this time. And the area was famous for its cabarets and dance halls and café concerts and also brothels. And Toulouse-Lautrec, with his stunted physique, felt very much at home there. It was an area of outcasts and entertainers and artists, pleasure seekers as well. He found willing models. He got to know many people. He was outgoing, he was extroverted, and for a time he lived in a brothel. So we're looking here at a work that is entitled At the Moulin Rouge, the Dance. It dates from 1889. Moulin Rouge, meaning Red Mill. This was one of the famous entertainment spots in Montmartre. It had opened only 5 years before in 1894. And there were dancers that performed there that were quite famous, that had really established identities in Paris in the entertainment world. And we see one of them here. His name was Valentin Le Dessaussé, the Valentin, the boneless one. Apparently he was double jointed. We can see this here in his legs. So he could move in a way that was really quite extraordinary. And he has a very long, gaunt physique with a pointed nose. His height, his thinness is exaggerated by his top hat, and you can see his legs seem almost boneless in their double jointedness, their double jointed pose. And what he's doing here is training a new girl. So this work is sometimes carry that subtitle, Training of the New Girl at the Moulin Rouge. So she's showing what she can do, and she's receiving instruction apparently from him. But this is simply a motif within the larger scene and the movements of visitors to this place. So we see, in a way Degas might do it, a figure here in the foreground cut off by the frame, moving away, women passing across the foreground, one overlapped by the other, and little pockets of conversation in the background. The bald serving man in the distance and the gas lamps. In the same vein, this is in the salon of the brothel of the Rue des Moulins, the Street of the Mills. This dates from 1894, and this is in your textbook. So we're looking at the outer room of a brothel, where clients would inspect the women who were available for sex at a cost, and they would make their choice. And as I said, this is a place where Lautrec spent a lot of time and actually resided for a time, and made paintings that shows really all aspects of what went on in the brothel. He seems to depict the women without judgment. He shows us something of the what might be called the false gaiety, the garishness of the setting. We see that, but we also see something of the melancholy, really relatable underside to all the color and gaiety that is a kind of facade. Women sitting about. Perhaps this is the madam here looking at us, and dressed more completely, more fully, while other women are scantily clad. You notice one cut off here by the frame. By the way, Degas was also an artist who was drawn in brothels and made many particularly prints in that location. So here, one of these intimate brothel scenes. This is called The Bed. And so we're seeing two prostitutes sharing the same bed in a state of sleep or near sleep. And notice just how sketchy and how rough and unfinished the technique is. And yet, I think he conveys, even through all this roughness, a real sense of intimacy in the portrayal of these two figures. And here, one entitled The Medical Inspection, again, a brothel scene dating from 1894. Women waiting in line to be expected to see that they pass the cleanliness requirements in order to perform, in order to work in the brothel. Now, Lautrec was particularly famous for posters. When the Moulin Rouge opened, Lautrec was asked to design posters as advertisement, and he proved to be brilliant at this. He was ridiculed by snobbish artists for applying his skills to such a task. This is really advertising art, but he didn't care, and he really turned it into, I think, an art at a very high level. So here is Aristide Bruant as the image indicates, in his cabaret. Now, the medium used here is color lithography, and this was newly perfected, newly developed in the late 19th century. The page has to go through a press for every color, and so registration alignment is critical. It would seem that Lautrec looked at Japanese prints, learned some lessons from them, and has applied some of those ideas to his printed designs. You'll notice here the emphasis on large, unmodulated color areas. They're really beautifully shaped and positions. The black hat, the large black cape, just a few details, and the red scarf that stands out brilliantly against the cape. The Aristide Bruant shown in profile. Uh, Here is a poster for the Moulin Rouge, made in 1891. And we see here forceful lettering that tells us again and again, Moulin Rouge, the Red Mill, that there is a concert and a dance every evening, and that performing there is La Goulou. So we see here two of the famous performers at Moulin Rouge. Here in the foreground is the Valentin again, Le Dessoucet, the boneless one, with his very recognizable, tall, gaunt appearance. Notice the nose again and the pointed chin. He's shown in profile and in silhouette with just a few details that indicate his arm as opposed to his chest and details of the face, just a few lines. In the background is La Goulou. So this is a nickname that means the greedy one or greedy guts. She was famous for, as she danced, moving around the room and picking up bits of food and drink from people's tables. I think she was the one who also would kick the hats off of men's heads. And apparently she was very good at just catching the brim of the hat and flipping it off. So we see her dancing here, and I'm not sure what this is, but perhaps some kind of decoration, which is shown as another flat, outlined, and unmodulated shape that is unmodulated, ungradiated with colors with gas lamps in the distance, and all the spectators watching on, another silhouette. Here is Jane Avril, another well-known performer, and there are photographs of her dancing in this way with her leg lifted high in the air and held up by one arm. So we see her name. We see stage curtains or stage backdrops here. She might come on here in between. She is framed by a black line that then becomes the fiddlehead of a string bass with a single musician and his music down below. So all these images are done with great economy. Just a few motifs are shown, and yet the shapes given to those motifs, especially the performers, are really distinctive, such that I think if we didn't have Jane Avril's name here, anybody at all familiar with the subject matter would identify her instantly. And yet she's shown so simply with just a few colored shapes. Again, it's the outline, it's the contour that is so expressive and so indicative of individual identities. This is the image of what's in your textbook, Jane Avril again. But she's seen as the principal figure at the Divan Japonais, which means the Japanese couch or love seat. And the address is given 75 Rue des Martyrs, Street of the Martyrs, again on the hill of Montmartre. We can recognize here Jane Avril, but also the man behind her is Edouard Dujardin. He is the man who coined the name Cloisonnism for the style developed by Gauguin and Bernard. He was also editor of the Revue Wagnerienne. Additionally, the performer on the stage is Yvette Guilbert, and she was known for wearing long black gloves, as we see here, and then waving her arms about and holding her arms in expressive poses, just as we see. Her head is cut off, but all we need is her body and those gloves to be able to identify her by name. Jane Avril shown as a black silhouette. The shape, the contour is expressive and indicative of her identity, a tall, thin woman. Her purse is here on the bar. She's got a drink in front of her, a fan, and just a few fiddleheads of basses in the arms of the conductor tell us that there is a pit orchestra in between Jane Avril and the stage. Brilliant image. I want to show you finally a number of images which show Toulouse-Lautrec's interest in music, which, as you know, is an interest of mine. This is uh, Mademoiselle Diho at the piano, dates from 1891. Now, her her brother, Desiree Diho, who had been painted by Degas. Diho was the bassoonist in the orchestra of the opera. Um, so Toulouse-Lautrec was a distant cousin of Desiree, and he must have been a distant cousin of Marie Diho as well. Lautrec loved the portraits that Degas had painted of both, with Desiree puffing on his bassoon in the middle of the orchestra and Marie seemingly interrupted while playing the piano in another. And here is that Degas portrait of Marie Diho here, looking back at us as if she has been interrupted. She seems a bit impatient, as if she wants to return to her music. Um, uh, Lautrec would drag dinner guests, no doubt under the influence of much alcohol, to the Diho's house to enjoy the Degas portraits of them as a dessert. Lautrec's own painting of Marie Diho at the piano, if you think back to the paintings of the subject that I've shown you, by Renoir especially, this is much less decorative, and it really shows us a woman not just finding a melody with one hand, as Renoir does, but actively engaged with concentration in playing the piano. This is a serious image. And you'll note that in the background it contains a reference right here to the Degas portrait that we just saw. I'll bring them up together. Here it is. And it's included there in the background, the Degas portrait that Lautrec so much admired. The Dihos were serious musicians, but as a habitué of the dance halls and the cafe concerts of Montmartre, Lautrec's everyday musical fare was rather the sentimental, sarcastic, and sexually suggestive songs that were performed there, and that it said he too would sing loudly and off key on occasion. On several occasions, when his cousin Desiree Diho composed songs, Lautrec would supply the images for the publication of the sheet music. And I want to show you a couple of those. Okay. All right, so this is labeled. We're looking here at a sheet music cover. And it looks like an owner of this has written some words down below. These would not be part of the original design. As you can see, the title of the music, which would be on a following page, is sagesse, and that means wisdom. This is typical of the of Lautrec's covers, and showing merely a figure or two in a minimally defined setting. The cover image here portrays a middle-aged man in evening attire speaking to a fashionably dressed woman who is seated out of doors and seen from behind, perhaps in a park or a sidewalk cafe. With no other figures present, their interaction seems quite possibly romantic in nature, maybe an exchange of sentiments or a proposition. The image is suggestive, but ultimately open-ended and ambiguous. In the song that goes with this, we hear a man reflecting on the common fate of himself and a woman. He says in the song that he could exchange expressions of love, but afterwards they might yawn with boredom and ask of themselves, why this empty suffering? As friendship often follows these troubles of the soul, the man muses, let us imagine that we loved each other once, and now let us be friends, madame. So Lautrec's image introduces this interaction by giving physical attributes to the figures, but defers to the song to reveal line by line their disillusion and melancholy, and the poignant wisdom of the concluding proposition. Let us just be friends. You're looking here at the cover designed by Lautrec for a group of songs, of which one of which was Sagesse by Desiree Dehaut. The title of the group of songs were The Old Stories, The Old Tales, and that's what is shown up here. On poems by Jean Gudetsky, set to music by Desiree Dehaut. And what we're looking at is the wraparound cover that was designed by Toulouse-Lautrec. So imagine this bent in the middle and wrapping around the sheet music which would be contained within. The cover image here portrays a middle-aged man. This is Desiree Dehaut himself, in evening attire. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. Okay, on the cover, the short, stocky Dehaut is portrayed walking along the Seine, and he's turning to cross the Pont des Arts, the Bridge of the Arts. This is the bridge that Renoir painted, if you remember. The bridge leads directly to the Institute of France, the dome of which is seen here across the bridge. Additionally, the dome of Les Invalides and the newly built Eiffel Tower appear in the distance. They're in reverse. Really, they should be on the other side of the Pont des Arts. But this is what happens when you draw something as it should appear and then print it, it is reversed in the process. One sees a single pedestrian. There's a balloon in the air here, a hot air balloon, and a pair of boats on the river. Dehaut carries a parcel that is difficult to identify. It could be his bassoon in its case. Looks to me more like I don't know, food, like celery. But he leads most obviously, he leads a muzzled bear by a length of chain. Their movements are slow and relaxed, as if this unlikely duo was out for its usual evening stroll. The bear may be a satirical portrayal of the poet Gudetsky, who is also blonde and high cheekboned, and whose poems in the songs were tethered to the melodies of Dehaut. The shuffling movement of bear and master toward the dome of the Institute strikes a jab at the pretense of the Academy, who was housed in the Institute, the lofty institution which stood guard over the traditions of high French culture. So notice how economical it is again, and many things are silhouetted or simply outlined, filled in with solid color. The body of Dehaut, the buildings in the distance, and yet it's just enormously clever, and just with a few outlines and shapes, he so tellingly indicates the strolling, casual movement of bear and Dehaut and figure as they move along the river. So clearly, the setting of Paris. All right, from Lautrec, then we're going to look at a few examples of naturalism. This was the dominant mainstream artistic style at the end of the 19th century. At the time of the 1889 exposition in Paris, for which occasion the Eiffel Tower was built, there was a centennial exhibition containing important paintings made over the last 100 years. There was a decennial exhibition which featured paintings of the last 10 years, as well as the Salon that took place in Paris at the time with 5,810 entries, and the Salon of the Independence, where Van Gogh, Seurat, and Toulouse-Lautrec all exhibited. So there was an explosion of art on view in 1889, and no doubt the aim of this was to show that Paris was the center of the art world, that the French were the strongest in their cultural achievements. As I said, naturalism with its descriptive and empirical orientation dominated. And this was in keeping with the prevalence of naturalist literature. Zola would have been the primary exponent of naturalism. He had many followers. Zola was in old age by 1889. Also, the widespread reliance on scientific inquiry to explain the world and remedy problems. I think that's consistent with the dominance of naturalism in art, as well as the dominance of the middle class in politics, economics, and culture. These were down to earth people, practical people who had less and less awareness of myth and history, less interest in that, and were more attached to the world of the time. Uh, Works by Bastien Lepage, who lived between 1848 and 1884, was regarded as the leader of the naturalist school. Well, he was deceased by this time by a few years, but prominent works by him were borrowed and put on view. I'm showing you a couple of those. This is Haymaking, which dates from 1878, a painting 61 inches by 70 inches in size. It had been exhibited at the Salon of 1878. Well, you'll notice the subject is that um, of rural work, the hard, brutalizing work of the rural poor. And this had been controversial when exhibited in, that is, subjects of this kind had been controversial when portrayed and exhibited in, 1840s, 1850s, but they were much more widely accepted by 1878 when this work was exhibited. Um, the figures are depicted with a really photographic-like verisimilitude and accuracy. And what we see here is a male figure who, in the middle of the day, is asleep, exhausted after a morning of work and a full stomach. And the woman next to him may have just awakened from her nap. She looks dazed. One might also interpret that dazed expression as indicating a lack of intellectual development, and one who just simply lives more in the world of physical work and sensual experience. Um, Everything is depicted with a kind of close attention to detail and exacting accuracy. We see this in the flowers, and certainly in their clothing. Notice the details of the hand and the lunch bucket over here. Another work by Bastien Lepage is, there. It is Joan of Arc listening to the voices. This dates from 1879. An even larger work, 8 feet by 9 feet, exhibited at the Salon of 1880. Somewhat controversial because it mixes the detailed naturalism of Bastien Lepage's style with elements of imagination and fantasy. He depicts her not in her military attire as a triumphant leader, but rather as a poor country girl, hearing the voices that would inspire her to take up military leadership and to lead the French effort to expel the English from France. So you'll notice that in the background, there are 3 specters, 3 saints. They're most obvious perhaps by their halos, one here, and here. And they are the source of the voices which inspire the ecstatic response of Joan of Arc, who's gotten up from her spinning over here and tipped the spinning wheel over. There's a chair, and she looks in a kind of ecstatic way, a rapt way into the leaves overhead, toward the sky, as she hears these voices. Again, the technique is exacting, precise, lots of minute details, but also somewhat sketchy in places, indicating the realm of the imagination, or these voices from afar that she hears. All right, so from the 1880s, works that were on view, I'm going to show you a bunch of them that represent naturalism at the end of the century. And this is the work of Pascal Adolphe Jean, last name Benyon Bouveret. Denyon Bouveray, who lived between 1852 and 1931, a long life. And I showed you this in contrast with Gauguin's painting of Vision after the Sermon. This dates from 1886, and it's a Brittany Pardon. And I explained then, I suppose, that this was a religious activity of the Brittany area, where on occasion people would subject themselves to mortification of the flesh, to punishment of the body, by walking around the church, and I think even more broadly, processing through the region barefoot and sometimes even crawling. They would carry candles. It was an expression of contrition, of penance, with the hope that God would favor them and perhaps provide them with their basic needs. This is a place where people struggled to survive, where there was widespread poverty. So we're seeing here a portion of the procession of local people turning around the church and around the figure of a beggar holding up a bowl. Denyon Bouveray would make use of photographs in order to study the various figures, dressing up individual figures and photographing them. And you have in your textbook an example of this particular figure, and it's photographed. The photographs would have been in black and white, so color would have to be added. But he relied on these photographs as a kind of part of the preliminary study process. And in the end, the work itself, the finished work, has a photographic-like accuracy in the representation of details of clothing and facial expressions and other details. There was also, I think, linked to this and linked to the popularity of such paintings, an awareness of folk traditions that were being displaced by modernity. Now, as I told you earlier, Brittany was the part of France that was least developed, most primitive, that had retained these folk traditions. And so they were looked upon as something of great value at this time. Not merely the superstitions of the local people, but key to the history of the country, the culture of the country. And it so often happens, we value what we are aware of being on the verge of losing. That same theme of cherishing disappearing traditions is evident in works by Scandinavian artists expressed in a naturalist style, and also allied to the theme of nationalism. And here we're looking at the work of Erik Varenskiold, and the work is Peasant Burial, dating from 1883-85, a work which is 40 by 59 inches. He was Norwegian. He had studied in Munich and Paris, and this was a common phenomenon that there were no art academies. There were little opportunities for artistic training at a high level in the Scandinavian countries, except for Denmark, where there was an academy. So the painters, ambitious painters from those areas, would come to European cultural centers like Paris, like Munich, academies in both places, often having won a scholarship from their local community. And they're in places like Paris, then they would develop their artistic skills and perhaps stay, perhaps return, or perhaps move in between the two places. So the subject here is as the title indicates, a peasant burial attended by a meager few people. This may be the widow of the deceased, who we see in profile on the left. This man is identified in your textbook as the local schoolmaster. He's not wearing a clerical dress, so apparently he's been pressed into service to read the funeral ritual, and then members of the community, perhaps relatives, are in attendance. All simply dressed. They probably are wearing their best for the occasion. uh, behaving really quite naturally, and depicted in a naturalistic way, um, with a view into the distant landscape, uh, painted in light and rather bright colors. A painting that it seems faithful in its portrayal of a commonplace event, and one which seems to celebrate the simplicity and humility of peasant traditions. This work, now by, also in your textbook, by Albert Edenfeld, is really quite similar um, in subject matter, in um, in attitude toward the subject. This is Old Woman of, it's hard to pronounce, Ruocolati on the Church Hill, dating from 1887, uh, 51 by 62 inches. The artist Edenfeld was Finnish. Um, he too moved between Finland and the Scandinavian country of his birth, and in this case Paris, where he exhibited his work, and in 1889 won the Grand Prize of Honor at the International Exposition. His painting of peasant women shows us after church, this presumably this is a church building, the title says Church Hill, a group of women, young, old, conversing, wearing their distinctive regional costumes, looks like woven fabrics, one woman speaking while the others listen with varying degrees of interest, depicted in a naturalistic, straightforward way. Deviating from the peasant subjects, I want to show you a work by the Finnish painter Magnus Enkel, which is entitled The Concert, dating from 1893. So even in more remote areas of Europe, there was an interest in musical activity and the experience of it. And so we're looking here at the audience with a focus on a small group of listeners who are seen close up, and we see the way they appear in listening with focus, looking toward the stage, the style naturalist again. And then lastly, I'm going to show you a work by the Belgian artist Leon Frederick. You see here, this dates from 1882 to 83, called Chalk Cellars. This is in your textbook. A large work. The central panel of it is 6 feet 6 inches by 8 feet 9 inches, and the lateral panels then smaller. They're 6 feet 6 inches in height, but I think only about 3 to 4 feet in width. Now you'll recognize the format here as that of the triptych. The format that one sees in so many medieval and Renaissance altarpieces displayed on altars in chapels and churches. Now, normally, the lateral panels would be half the width of the central panel, so that the whole thing could be closed up and then open and closed according to liturgical season or feast day. That's not quite the case here. The lateral panels cannot fully cover the central panel, but still we have that triptych idea. Three separate images joined together. You'll notice there has been an attempt made to link the lines, particularly of the landscape, the road, and the fields, with between the panels. Now, what's seen here is a family group in the very center, and they're having their midday meal. Their clothing is rather ratty. The children are shoeless. So this is an image, as your textbook puts it, of desperate poverty. And then we have on either side an image of a family coming toward us. It looks like, particularly next to the one on the right, this looks like beginning of day, and this looks like the end of day. In fact, I think the titles are morning, noon, and evening. So what's suggested here is the cycle of the day and the hard work that must begin in the morning, walking to a job site, resting for lunch only, and then returning at the end of the day. it's a cycle of hard work and really inescapable poverty. And the triptych format suggests that there are religious overtones, religious messages implied by this. It would seem that the painting is intended uh, to elicit sympathy and even charity from the viewer. It's not people like this that would see the painting on display, but rather middle class museum goers, exhibition goers who have time and the income to afford such things. And for those people, then I think the painting calls for, from those people, the painting calls for sympathy and charity. Again, the style is an example of the naturalism that dominated European painting, mainstream European painting. Of course, not the work of avant-gardists like Van Gogh and Gauguin at the end of the 19th century.